All right, for the final time, here we are to wrap up the state finals and the season as we put everything and tie a bow on it, put everything in a nutshell, so to speak. I'm Matt Rodewald. Thanks for joining us for the Friday Night Drive state final review and season review as well. And Steve Soucie with us as always. Hello, sir. Have you finally thawed out after the cold weekend we had down there?
Still a little bit of lack of feeling, like a few of my left foot toes on my left foot, but we're getting there.
It took a little while for me. I went Saturday, and by the fourth quarter of one game, I'm like, I should not be out here. This is not a good idea. And I went outside for some of this. For you had the comfiness of inside, should you choose. And some people, which is nice, they stay in there for a little bit, then they go down and get a little bit of the field action. They come in back and forth. So I don't know if there's a good way to do it in terms of for your role as, say, a writer. What do you like to do when you're at a state finals experience where you have the joys of a press box where you can stay warm and function properly, but it's hard to get the feel of the game sometimes?
Yeah, I try to get a kind of a mixed bag because in a non-state final situation, I'm a hardcore sideline guy. So it's where I want to be. It's what, but boy, it was not very conducive to that this weekend. I'm not really, I don't really consider myself to be a cold weather weakling either, but boy, it would just bite through you there for a while. So I spent the majority of this weekend in the press box, which is different than what I would usually do. But frankly, I don't think I could have stomached all 8 games of those conditions.
We'll stick with this subject for as we continue on, but I want to just note we're going to talk about a lot of things from the public versus private debate that boy, social media had a good time with that over the course of the last few days. And also we'll recap all 8 games here to some extent and kind of, look ahead here to what we're looking for 2025 a little bit. I know you're working on schedules. How comfortable do you feel about where you are from a schedule standpoint for next fall?
We're very, very early in that process. Basically, I did get once again my famous end of the season tweet did net some schedules for me that I did not have. So
that helps.
But it's a lot of progress that basically will go all the way through the spring, and then early in the spring, then I'll start having a kind of a hardcore like, hey, if you need a week game, I've got the list for you now. But that conversation is not usually had until March or April, to be completely honest.
Well, if you follow me on social media, I had some conversations with people about what the debate was, public and private, but I also kind of casually put, again, gentleman's agreement, gentleman's bets, some lines, so to speak, about how I thought these games would go, especially Saturday. And, I really had Geneva given 18 points, so to speak, to East St. Louis. And so I went to that game as a fan. As I've mentioned on this show a lot, I grew up in the community, so it was a big deal for me. And I thought, you know what, maybe I'll stay for Batavia too and watch them both. I had hoped to see both student sections. The weather changed all that. You saw the bands, but I'll tell you what, if you were down there playing in a band, good for you. That was not easy. That was awesome to see so many marching bands and pep bands that were down there trying to do it through those conditions. I want everyone to understand they do not have to be there. That is up to every music director or choir director, band director, those department chairs, and maybe the administration has something to do with it, or even the culture and tradition. But not everyone is required to bring their band down there. It's just part of the game sometimes. And the students and the music departments that push through on those situations, good for you guys. I want to make sure that everybody gets their applause for that. But I got out of the car, Soucie, and you'll appreciate this. I had 4 or 5 layers of clothes on. I get the vest on. I get the hoodie on. And then I go for the winter jacket. Where's my winter jacket? Oh, no. I left the winter jacket at home.
Wow.
I packed the whole car of everything, and I forgot the winter jacket. So I'm out there in a sweatshirt. And with plenty of it was fine from a layer standpoint. I had plenty of layers on you, but you just wanted the one coat to feel real good. Yeah, that didn't happen. Had the snow pants on. I hadn't had those on in probably 6 years for a high school football game. I wore those doing the sideline once. And, oh, yeah, kudos to the sideline folks for the television broadcast. That was not easy, too. Casey Standahar on Friday, all 4 games, she doesn't go inside. I want you to understand. I've been in that role. It's hard to do. But the cold, I thought, affected the football a little bit, Souce. What do you think in terms of how that impacted the way some of these teams want to operate out there? I thought it had an impact a little bit.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, and I think you saw it specifically with some teams that maybe came in there with high octane offenses heading into the game with maybe an emphasis on throwing the football. That just seemed to be a little bit trickier for a lot of the teams to do, especially the downfield stuff. The teams that were successful throwing the ball, more often than not, it seemed to be maybe a broken play, something that was designed as a 10 to 12 yard route. Maybe they slipped a tackle, and then all of a sudden it turned into a 60, 65-yard gain. That seemed to be the predominant number of big plays. We did not see a lot of plays that were designed to go big downfield,
right,
actually connect and make happen.
And, obviously with the cold affecting the players, it's going to affect a lot of the teams traveling and the fans that want to go down there too. We've seen this in the past. This is nothing that's terribly new on Thanksgiving weekend. But again, this was a very late Thanksgiving weekend. So the risk of getting serious cold weather to impact fans, I thought it impacted the attendance a little bit. And I think you noticed that on Friday a little more than Saturday.
Yeah, I would agree. It felt like there were some times where I thought maybe the stands were going to be – I was anticipating the stands would be a little bit more full. And then I retaught myself the lesson when I went downstairs and actually stood around in it in a while for myself. So if you were on the fence this weekend, it made for a pretty easy decision, I think, to be like, hey, I think I'll just take a pass on that one, maybe watch it on TV. And I think that was a factor, I'm sure, for some people. I don't know how many, but I'm sure it was for some.
And I would be curious to get the television ratings back from Weigel in terms of Nielsen ratings to see if they got a little bump just from casual fans. And again, it would be minuscule at best, but just to see if there was a little bit of a higher rating, and that would, I would guess, attribute immediately to the weather. But then again, that might have been erased by the fact that we saw so many blowouts this weekend. You couldn't help but notice it 2 games in that, we might have a problem this weekend, that this weekend was going to be a little rough.
Yeah, it was just, obviously that overriding theme. It just kind of felt like games got out of control pretty quickly. And there were very few contests where you felt like the outcome was even remotely in doubt as early as halftime. You would be like, well, I don't think this is coming back for us. So it was frustrating. I'm sure for a lot of people, and as being a guy that was pretty active on Twitter this weekend, and how they say regrets to your mentions. Well, my mentions were a mess this weekend. So
yeah,
it was, to be frank, it was a lot of people expressing a lot of aggravation and frustration with how this ended up happening and the way that it did. The answers aren't as easy as people make it either. So that's one of the things. I do think there are some things that could improve the situation, but as of the system that we currently have, there's not really a really easy solution to fixing some of these things.
One more note before we go through the games individually. You and I know people with the IHSA very, very well in terms of, and if you think we know they know this too, that they have an issue that they're going to have to address somehow. And it's not so much the IHSA, it's the member schools. They are a system that functions by its members more than anything else. So it's not the IHSA setting rules, it's the schools themselves setting those issues. So, a lot of the stuff I saw on social media too, they were coming from like actual school accounts. And I saw one superintendent actually using social media. What are you doing? File a proposal yourself and get out there and actually make the change. You have the ability to do it. A couple people got on Sycamore a couple weeks ago because they put the proposal out there to say, hey, wait, the prep bowl is not fair. You're giving teams a chance to go play games that, it gives them an unfair advantage. But at least they're putting proposals out there to start the conversation, to have it the right way. Social media is not the way to do it. So you and I with fans, we get it. We understand the fans out there. But I'll just say, I don't want to see a school district leader using social media to actually, try and whine and complain about it. If you have a problem with it, do the channels that are available to you and put the proposal together. We all will love it. You and I would love a debate over one proposal versus the other, right? We've done this a lot.
Well, for me, it was more about, this isn't a new problem. It might have been cranked up several notches this past weekend, but this is not a new problem. So if everybody understands and recognizes that situation, what you have to take into consideration was there were a number of proposals that were rolled out, and the crux of the problem seemed to be this weekend that everybody was bringing up was issues with the multiplier waiver. You know how many proposals there have been made about the multiplier waiver and its issues over the past 3 to 5 years?
Every year.
Zero. There have been no proposals that have addressed the multiplier waiver specifically.
Correct.
But yet that is the one that everybody was talking about this weekend. The only way to get anything like that changed has to go through that process. The IHSA can't arbitrarily say, okay, we've got a problem with this. We're just going to wipe it out. It's going away. No, it's got to go through the legislative progress. And if nobody is bringing that up and bringing up a proposal to at least begin that discussion, it's never going to change. There's not even going to be discussion of change until somebody puts that out there and identifies the problem, which I think we all have over the last couple of years, especially this year, and then takes a step towards trying to make corrections, amendments, something to it, because the reality of the situation is unless something extreme happens that I'm unfamiliar with how it would even be done, nothing's going to happen with this next year. Because the proposal process has already begun for changes to be made in next year's IHSA calendar. That's over with. We can't go back to the table now and say, oh, we want to bring this up. Nope, that's already happening. So the next time that someone can broach this issue will be next fall when they're asking for amendment, revisions and all these other things. So the reality of the situation is unless a rather drastic measure is taken, and I don't really see that happening, to be completely honest with you, we have to start a conversation before we can get resolution to the conversation.
We got some folks that are commenting on it, and we will get to some of these as well in just a minute. But I want to spend some time on the games, if we can, themselves and talk about the athletes, which is what we truly enjoy about this whole thing. Well, let's start with Friday. We expected Althoff to be the favorite in this one. They certainly acted like it. Quite the running attack, and if you were up early enough, you went, whoa, he's at 100 yards, 200 yards, 300 yards, 400 yards on the ground. That was quite the effort out there for the Oregon recruit.
Yeah, it was funny because it was like you started watching the game and first play of the game, he gets dropped for a 3-yard loss. So you're like, all right, maybe this is going to be interesting. 3 plays later, 58-yard touchdown run. And it was just beginning. It was, just a really, really spectacular athlete. And you look at it and it's like, well, he's doing this against a 1A team. Well, let's be honest, guys. If you go look at Althoff's schedule, they didn't play any 1A teams until they got in the playoffs. Nope. And this kid had a monster season inside of it, playing against 5As and 6As, 7As, 8As. They played larger schools. So that argument does not wash with me. That was a very special talent. I was glad we got to watch it. Obviously, scoring 7 touchdowns, a couple of 2-point conversions on it. Individually, 46 points scored, shattered the previous record of 36 by an individual player in a game. Just one of those things that I felt like in some ways got a little bit overshadowed by what happened after it, which is unfortunate. And I actually think a statistical error kept him from getting the all-time rushing record, because that 80-yard reception, in my opinion, that should have been scored as a running play. I believe that was a backwards pass. So that is what it is. But still, 500 plus yards of total offense. That's only happened twice in state history. So
good thing they have tape. They could review that sort of thing.
They could, in theory. Yeah, they could. But that was the discussion that was rolling around during that game. But like I said, a stunning performance for him. Total offense wise, only 2 people in state history have ever cracked 500 yards in a state championship game. Him and Ty Isaac of Joliet.
Yeah, and I remember the Ty Isaac game too, watching it and just thinking, my goodness, I don't think we'll ever see that again. Well, we got close, but it's been 15 years since we've seen something that close too. Been a long time. Hey, if you're a Lena Winslow senior, I feel bad for you because of the way things ended up. The program had won so many championships these last 2 years. Yes, you get to the championship, but offensively struggled against a really good Camp Point Central defense, and then this team as well with Althoff. So that's just a tough way to go if you're a varsity athlete for the Lena Winslow, for folks in Lewin.
Yeah, it is. But, I thought it was kind of telling that, there was some stuff circulating after the game, and Lena Winslow coach was like, we'll be back. And it's hard to not believe him, in that situation. So the one thing that I did notice about those kids took it in the right way. They were pretty classy about it after the fact. And I thought that was pretty great. the way that they handled the situation. Because, I mean, there was a lot of conversation swirling around about Althoff too, and about how they built this roster and how it happened. So, but Lena, I felt like for the most part, everything I saw, the Lena kids handled it with class.
That's where the chatter started. And then I went to Chicago Christian. We need to clear up a few things with Chicago Christian. First off, I was surprised at just how well they played. I thought Maroa Forsyth would be able to put more of a fight up. They did not. And it was a Chicago Christian route from the start. But they're not like every other private school we've seen. Can you explain why that is?
Well, I mean, a lot of people are talking about transfers and how these kids got to where they got. And that just didn't happen here. That's the reality of the situation. This is essentially the same team that got clocked by Maroa Forsyth in the second round of the playoffs last year. I mean, this is essentially the same roster. And those kids talked about it in the postseason. I mean, they brought in a new coach. It was a new mentality. Those kids got after it in the offseason and in the weight room during the regular season. They attacked everything that came at them. They came back with a senior-dominated roster that didn't want that junior season to be repeated. So they came back with a renewed focus, new energy, and just utmost belief in themselves. And that resonated throughout the postseason. And they put together, in my opinion, one of the more perfect efforts of the weekend from a team that played both offensively and defensively. They did exactly what they set out to do.
I look at Chicago Christian as a program, as a school, as a community overall. And for me, it's been a forgotten program. There are so many teams that you're going to, oh, yeah, I remember them. Oh, yeah, they've been good. They just kind of disappeared off the radar for years, and they snuck up on everyone this year. I am so impressed with what they did. Hats off to those guys this year for actually getting it done.
Yeah, I mean, it just really was, it was kind of a snowball thing with them too. Yeah. It's like I kind of felt like they were a pretty good team, and maybe they'd make a nice little run, and kind of raised my eyebrow a little bit when they beat Tri-Valley in the second round. I'm like, maybe this team is better than I think they are. And then they just kept going and going and going. And even heading into that final, I wasn't sure how they were going to react to it, but it didn't take long for me to figure out that I was way off base, just in terms of how good this team was and how capable they were, especially on the defensive side of the ball. They did just a really, really nice job of just not allowing Maroa to get into like the offensive flow that they wanted to. Right. I mean, it was really, really impressive.
Now we go to 3A, and it was like after these two games, you thought, private school dominance is starting, and you knew it was going to continue in 3A because Montini is just that good, and their offense is as good as their defense is, to be honest. When you saw them put it all together against Monticello, what made it work for them here on Friday?
Yeah, Montini was really, really impressive. I came into that game thinking that, that Montini's defense would probably carry the day here and lead them to what I thought would be a pretty comfortable victory. And they ended up winning pretty comfortably. But the aspect that they kind of added to that was a pretty dominating offensive performance on top of it. So it was, both facets really kind of came through for them, really, really limiting defensively. But the explosive nature of their offense and their ability to crack some big plays in this game really wasn't something that I was anticipating. I thought it would be more of a workman-like effort, long drives, defense would shorten the game up a little bit. That really wasn't the way it played out. Montini flexed its muscles early and often and kind of really took control of that game. So kudos to them in that situation. Monticello was a little bit hampered from injuries, but I still think that this would have been, even if they would have been perfectly healthy, this would have been a really, really tall mountain for them to climb.
Nobody wants to see Montini in Class 3A. Don't worry, they won't be in 3A anymore. But for them to go back down, because they had to go back down, because they weren't winning games. I don't care how tough your conference is, you got to win games. And, after Chris Andriano left, there was a noticeable dip, and you wondered, how long will it take for Montini to find their way back? Patience with Mike Bukowski and that whole staff. They've all been on that staff for a long time. And Bukowski, he knows winners. It's wrestling and softball and everything else. But, for them to kind of climb out of that, I've been impressed with what Montini did. I don't care if it's 3A, 5A, what have you. They challenged themselves by getting themselves in a very tough conference, and they were able to come away with a state championship. That's hard to do no matter who you are.
Yeah, I mean, you go back in the history, books here and look at when this actually happened, when they dropped down and they lost their multiplier. It was back-to-back 3 and 6 seasons. I mean, and then I think it was the year after that, and they actually did qualify for the playoffs. One year, their schedule had 4 previous state champions on it. I mean, so
that's fun.
for them, it's always kind of been, I know they're a good program, but can they get to 5 wins? Can in their schedule, can they get to 5 wins? And it was them and Nazareth that have had that issue
every year.
The last couple of years. But Montini kind of did the same thing that Nazareth did this year. They locked it in early, and when you saw that them locked in the wins and made sure that they were going to get in, the first reaction in my mind when I saw that, when they got to 5 pretty early in the season, I was like, that is not going to be good for the 3A field, because they're in and they're going to be in confidently, and that's exactly what happened.
So Montini gets that win, and we go to 4A. The sun sets, and I had wondered if the star power of J.C. Anderson and Braden Trimble would be enough to kind of keep them going. And I had wondered maybe 4A is the game of the night, but an old text to Dave Bernhardt in the middle of that one saying, "Hey, having fun yet?" went unnoticed. It was not happy to see blowouts all day, and so DePaul, wins that one comfortably. And for DePaul, another story where it's like, wow, they came out of absolute nothing to stun everyone, marching their way to a state championship. Hats off to the Rams.
Yeah, I couldn't help thinking about, back a few years. I want to say this was probably 5 years ago. It was before DePaul had done all their campus renovations and all this other stuff. I went up and watched a DePaul Prep Joliet Catholic Saturday football game where it wasn't even played on their campus. I don't even remember where it was played. And
Winnemac.
I don't even recall. Joliet Catholic beat them so badly that their 4th and 5th stringers, kids I did not even know who they were, and I'm not even sure they were even on the roster, were running circles around DePaul at the end of the game, because you still got to let those kids play. And I was just like, I'm like, boy, these guys are really, really, really far away from where I think they want to be. And that was probably at the low water mark for that program. And that was really only about 5 years ago. So for me to watch how far they came from that day, when they looked like, frankly, one of the most struggling programs I'd seen in a while, to reaching the apex 5 years later, that's really, really an impressive revolution. I really can't speak more to that.
And they're going to jump from 4, almost maybe 8. We talked about that because their enrollment actually went up on top of the fact that they haven't had the multiplier and the success factor. So they're going to see the biggest jump probably we've ever seen at the IHSA level. And of course, if you text someone in the middle of blowout, they're not going to text you back as they're broadcasting the game. So I understand, but I felt bad for all the crews down there trying to call these games, trying to make these stories interesting. Dave Bernhardt does it better than anybody else, and it's just like you're grasping for straws. There's only so many notes you're going through. So keep that in mind when you watch these games with the high schoolers that we're featuring. You are watching the Friday Night Drive podcast as we recap the state championship matchups, the review of the season, the review of the state finals. I'm Matt Rodewald, Steve Soucie with us. We'll switch from Friday of the state finals. We'll switch over to Saturday, and we have the best game of the day to start things off. You kind of wondered if it would be, and it held up. For a bit, it took a while because you wondered if Nazareth going to run away and hide here. Nope, not quite. This was a real good one all the way down to the end.
Yeah, thank goodness. We finally got a good one. That was basically the reaction there, It was definitely kind of a back and forth game, and in terms of it looked like, you're right, Nazareth looked like they were on the verge of breaking away, got that early long touchdown, and you're like, okay, here we go again. But Joliet Catholic kind of soldiered up and made a little bit of a charge there in the second half, got themselves back into it, got themselves into a situation where a 2-point conversion might have sent this thing into overtime. But there were so many kind of like weird little underlying stories in this game. The punter was like my favorite story from Nazareth in that game. Not only did he have the guts and the recognition to realize out of his own end zone that there was a first down opportunity for him on a punting attempt. Later, he goes and completes a 2-point conversion pass that, to be honest with you, if he had not completed that 2-point conversion pass in the fashion that he did, Nazareth may have lost that game, because Joliet Catholic would have had the opportunity to simply kick an extra point and win the game if he had not completed that pass. Yep. So a gutsy situation on both of those calls. it was an astonishing little detail that I think maybe got lost in the shuffle a little bit when you considered it, because after that fake punt out of their own end zone, Nazareth went the rest of the way down the field and scored a touchdown on that drive. So they could have been punting it. They ended up getting 7 out of that drive. So those scenarios right there were some of the fascinating underlying stories of that game, which turned out to be really, really good. Joliet Catholic didn't get the 2-point conversion on that play, so they ended up losing that game. But it was finally, we got a game that we could actually be excited about down to the wire.
It was the year of the quarterback, and we've heard so much about all these great quarterbacks, but I go back to Malachuk because I've seen him twice in the state championship, and I, not so much calling it this year. But where do you look at his legacy and where it ranks? Because there's been a lot of talk, obviously, about a J.J. McCarthy, but he didn't start as a freshman. Malachuk did, and he's got the pedigree and the 3 rings to prove it, and one of the most decorated in Nazareth history. So where does he rank when you look at him in terms of what he's left behind?
Well, first things first, he ends up currently as the all-time leader in career passing yardage. That's the first thing with him. The other thing that I was thinking about this weekend, haven't had an opportunity to do the full research yet, so I can't speak to this, but I'm pretty sure he may be the only quarterback in Illinois State history to have 3 rings as the primary starting quarterback. Like,
I think you might be. I have to dig that up too.
I gotta look to be sure, but I think that's the case. So right there alone, even if there's maybe 1 or 2 other names on that list that I'm not thinking of, that's incredible when you really think about it. 3 times a state champion as the starting quarterback. One of those as a sophomore. I mean, it is. I've been impressed with him all along. He just has that. He has that dog in him, I guess, is the best way that I can describe him. He does not back down from anything. Maybe a little bit, as far as classic quarterbacks go, maybe a little bit undersized. Yes. But it does not ever seem to deter him in any possible way. So just a really, really impressive career for him. Wherever he lands at the next step, I mean, I think someone's going to be looking back at that saying, I probably should have taken a shot at that. And I didn't.
He's one of my favorite players to cover these past couple of years, but I would say over the past 10 to 15 years, because he's played great on the big stage every time. When it came to the Peoria game and down at Champaign, last year in Normal, rallying in that comeback against Joliet Catholic, and then this year trying to hold on for dear life. 3 different ways to win football games, and he figured out how to do it. And so, hats off to Malachuk. And Tim Rackey here, let's talk about his coaching legacy, because he won – 83 state championships at Driscoll before going over to Nazareth, who had absolutely nothing going for them when he got there. And it took a while for him to get that thing moving. But about 10 years ago, you started to see the fruits of his labor, and 3 straight titles. They've got a couple now. Heck of a football school. They figured it out. Tim Rackey's one of the best to ever do it.
Yeah, absolutely. There really is no question about that. And it's something about the way that he's able to build programs and put those kids in positions, because some of these kids, especially for, in Saturday's game, I feel like I've been talking about these kids for 5 or 6 years.
Yes.
I mean,
Gabe Kaminsky, one of those.
And he has no qualms about saying, hey, I'm going to put a sophomore in this situation. He might not be quite ready for it, but he's going to learn on the job. We're going to coach him up. We're going to get him ready. And then before you know it, you've got a bunch of kids like you do now, where you look at them now after they completed their Nazareth career, they've had feeling like thousands of varsity high school football snaps underneath them at this point, and you're really not going to be able to throw much at them that they're not prepared for. And that's a credit to the way that they build that program. And if you looked in their roster, you'll see it almost every year. You'll see them sliding those sophomores, maybe some freshmen in there too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Them in there in situations where you're like, well, maybe they're not ready for this. And then every once in a while, one of those kids comes up with a really big play at that young age. And then once again, the rocket ship is taken off in the positive direction.
One of those teams that likes to do that too quietly is East St. Louis. And if you're talented, you will find your way to the field. And of course, guys like Christopher Bennett, those are guys that we've seen for years. To Ryan as well. I've been so impressed with East St. Louis's program over the years. I know they lost in heartbreaking fashion to Cary Grove. They blew out Prairie Ridge, and then a heartbreaker a couple years prior to that. But they keep finding their way back. And I know that when they get on this stage, there's a little jitteriness at some point. You will see the wobble from East St. Louis, and we saw that late second quarter against Geneva, where you thought, oh my goodness, we have a game here. The Vikings came to play. This was a really good game for about 2.5 quarters.
It was, and that was one of those things when you just kind of looked at it, you were like, what's going to be different here? What is going to be different for East St. Louis? And it was one of the things that I think I pointed out a couple of weeks ago, what I liked about East St. Louis when I've been watching them all season long, whether it be live or on tape when I've had the opportunity to take a look at them. I think they just kind of offensively, and I don't even know if it was intentional or something that they really talked about, offensively, they kind of went about things different than they're used to seeing from East St. Louis. They had a big touchdown play through the air, an 82-yard touchdown pass.
Yep.
Yes, that did happen. But in the past, it almost seemed like when things maybe weren't working as well as they hoped it would, eventually they'd start having possessions where basically they'd kind of run a bunch of fly patterns and just try to beat you athletic.
You did not see that on Saturday.
And you did not see that. They allowed their various weapons and in my opinion, while he may not have the stats and the big college offers and all these other things, I feel like their quarterback this year did a tremendous job of running that offense in the sense of having the recognition of saying, hey, they're going to give me the 8-yard out. You know what happens? I get the ball to him. My guy's good enough. He might make that guy miss, and he might turn it into a 30-yard play. Instead of trying to throw it 30 yards downfield, he's taking the shorty and knowing the odds are relatively good that his guy's going to make a play for him and extend that play and turn it into a 25 or 30-yard gain. So taking it that way, and that happened a lot on Saturday. They out of the backfield or passing the football, they turned an 8-yard play into a 25-yard gain. And they did it multiple times, breaking tackles, turn what looked like an 8-yard run into a 30-yard run by just powering through because they're that talented. And that's one of the situations that maybe in the past they had that talent and they had that talent advantage, but they tried to use it maybe in the wrong way. But I felt like this time that was not going to happen, and it didn't, because they were able to just kind of settle back in, and then before you knew it, they were on a run where they had scored on 6 of 7 possessions. And the only thing that stopped them from scoring on that 7th possession was the clock at halftime.
Yeah, so they got that pick right there at the end of the half.
So it was just like you were looking at that as in that way. It was like, maybe Geneva can stay in this game, but in order for them to do it, they're eventually going to have to get a stop, and they didn't get one for a very long time.
I was walking on the sidelines being a fan there, and when you're someone like me, an alum, you're trying to be a little bit distant, but there's also those kids, the sophomores and juniors, know they're not getting in the game at all, but they're still dressed, and so they're having their own conversation. And so sometimes they just turn to you and say, what do you think? And I said, guys, you got to make them punt the football once. At some point, you got to make them punt the football. And they never did.
Yep.
They never made them punt. And you knew that if you couldn't do that, Geneva's going to be going to have a tough time doing it. But I liked how their offense adjusted, but I had also said they had to come out fast, and they didn't do it. And so that's, when you get down in a 20-0 hole against one of the top teams in the country, frankly, this is what happens. But the fact that they got it within 6, I was stunned more than anything else. But 28 points on the board against one of the best teams in the country. Good for you guys, Geneva, but another second-place finish. Then they had to sit there and watch Batavia. And Batavia, well, didn't go as well as they had hoped. One team, one town, same result, another blowout loss to Mount Carmel.
Yeah, I mean, and it just really kind of felt like as we were going along there that Mount Carmel could pretty much do whatever they wanted to do offensively. And there wasn't a lot that Batavia could do to kind of rein them in or stop them. Jack Elliott had a monster game.
Yeah.
But, to their credit, Batavia was like, we know that this is going to be a monster uphill climb. We understand it. They just kept taking shots. I got to give them credit. They just kept shooting. I mean, it was like, maybe this won't work out. My guy finally got a nameplate. I was excited about that.
I was going to say, I saw that on TV and was like, hey, I know that. Yeah. They've got a name and stuff. I don't know what it is.
And he had a massive game. I mean,
a record-breaking game.
And you got to look at it and say to yourself, hey, that kid's a sophomore. I guarantee that's not the last we've heard of him. So, and we'll now have a nameplate to go with it. So that it goes along with it. But, but it was, for me, the game kind of played out in the fashion that I expected that it might. But I do credit Batavia for continuing to swing and just trying to not totally accepting their fate, if you would. Like, just was like, well, we're going to at least put some points on the board tonight, boys. We're going to at least, make you put a bunch of points on the board to make sure you win. So in that sense, it was some of that was at least entertaining.
Soucie, can I be the old man yelling at clouds or standing on my grass saying, get off my lawn for a second? Can you withstand that? Okay, because about 4 minutes to go in the game, and it was about a 35-point game or maybe a 28-point game.
Yeah.
Some hats started to emerge on the sideline for Mount Carmel. State championship hats. I'm sure Jordan Lynch probably would look back and say one of two things. Screw it, they're kids, let them have a good time, but maybe I shouldn't have let them put them on that soon, because all of a sudden Batavia kept scoring points. They got the best onside kick I've seen in years.
Yeah.
In that sequence. What do you think of the hats and the timing of the hats with about 4 minutes to go?
Yeah, I'm not a big fan. I'm like, we're going to get – you're going to get there, boys. Just slow your roll there for a couple minutes. All right? That's, that's a little marginal in my opinion. I wouldn't have done that. I just, I think there's,
I get it with 2 minutes to go.
There's obviously a little bit of chippiness between these two programs. I get that. I mean, but, like, I don't want to, like I said, I don't want to switch over into my get off my lawn strategy, but I'm a big believer, especially with programs like Mount Carmel, who now set the record for most state championships in Illinois state history. Sometimes, maybe act like you've done this before. Like, I didn't really think that was necessary.
The old Catholic League bravado that you see come out, and you do it, and you see it every year.
Yeah.
And, Lenti used to have they had those hats back then too. This isn't new. So, I thought you could wait a little bit longer to put this on. And also kind of thought, it serves them right if this thing gets within 10. It serves them right. Batavia quarterbacks still slinging it all over the field. And, they had emptied their bench. The cutest thing, I should say the coolest thing of this whole thing, and I'll call it cutesy, was that, they had those hats on. And they had to go back in the game because they gave up so many points. They had to put them back in. So I'm sure conversations will be at least had. Will they be with the team? I don't know, but internally, maybe. I don't know. So at this point, it was about 10:30 at night when the 8A game started, because what time did that get going? 9?
It was 9. I think it was 9:02. I think it started.
Brutal.
Brutal.
It
was scheduled for 7, by the way.
Yeah. A 7 o'clock game starting at 9 o'clock. Hashtag IHSA After Dark. There's nothing you can do about this as it's unfolding. You should be thankful there was no overtime with Nazareth JCA just for this reason, because it would have been worse. But at this point, it's hard to get the atmosphere. I wasn't there at that point. I had waved the white flag and gave up for TV. What was it like starting that 8A game at that hour? I've done a ton of soccer semifinal games very late, and you're struggling to get the energy up. You've been waiting all day to play, and then here they are at 9. What was it like?
Yeah, I think for me personally, based on the way that the games had gone at that point, I'll be honest, I was pretty tired. Like, it was just like, I was just like, tired of the lopsided games. I was just like, I want this game to be competitive. Please let it be competitive so it will engage me a little bit. I just honestly, I felt bad for both teams, like, in that situation, because it's like you have a body clock, you have you're trying to get yourself prepared for 7 or somewhere around 7. It's not going to go off at 7, but you're thinking worst case scenario, maybe 7:30, 7:45. And I mean, and you're just you're going through your process and you're backing everybody up, and you're like, well, hey, let's not get fully ready to go yet, because there's no point to it. We're going to be standing around in the cold. And
it's hard because in basketball, you're creatures of habit, and you're used to this sort of like ambiguity because the game's going. Football's not like this. Football is the game starts then and we go. And occasionally the sophomores run long, but not like this. And this is different. And so just keeping them in that routine had to be very difficult for those guys. Yeah,
obviously I don't think it made a difference in the outcome.
No, I don't either.
It was just kind of one of those. It was kind of one of those things you just kind of looked at it and we're just like, yeah, this isn't ideal. And then, but I mean, what's the solution? I mean, there's really nothing you can do about it. I mean, we've almost never had, that game start at 7:00. We've now also never had it start at 9 either.
That's different.
But
yeah.
It's just like, so you're kind of aware that this is a scenario that might come into play, but not quite to the extreme scenario that ended up actually happening.
Well, do you think York is tired of having Loyola pop up in November or December at this point?
Yeah, but I mean, in fairness to pretty much every other program that has had some success in 8A, they're all probably pretty tired of Loyola at this point. Yeah, I mean, you can say that about a couple of other programs as well.
I thought York had some good moments, though.
I did. I especially thought the first half was played, about as well as York could have hoped that first half would have been played. Of course, based on what has happened in multiple Loyola playoff games, you can't be comfortable at halftime with wherever you're at, because Loyola has proven that they are a very, very good second half football team, and they did it again. I mean, it was one of those situations where they just kind of once again seized control of that game in the second half and kind of imposed their will on York. But I thought given all those scenarios and all those things put into play, York put a good accounting for itself in this game, despite the fact that it ended up looking like it was, I think it was a little bit more competitive than the final score showed.
Pat Fitzgerald's kid, Ryan, he puts his own stamp on his own legacy as a 3-time state champ here. What'd you think of what his effort was like, not only through the course of the season, last couple of seasons, but how he finished it up here in the state championship win against York?
Statistically, nothing eye-popped from Saturday night's game. It really didn't. But the one thing that I've noticed about him, and especially over the last couple of weeks, I saw them in the semifinals against Lincoln Way East, is the decision-making on that young man is incredible. Like, it's almost like when he doesn't make the right read or the right decision, I'm more shocked than anything else. Because, he threw an interception in the Lincoln Way East game at the goal line, and I almost was like, wait a minute, something must have happened there. That can't possibly be what's going to be the resolution of that play. But that was one of the few times in the games that I've seen him play where, he had made an error, because it always seems like he makes the right choice. He throws the ball to the right guy. He picks the right hole if he's running the football. It just seems like all of those elements are in his bag of tricks, and he just does a really, really nice job of managing the game and giving Loyola seemingly exactly what they need in almost every given situation.
Hats off to the York Dukes, because I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the first team ever to get to the state championship, and that's something that their program needs, that kind of legacy to keep building upon. So this will be a team that everyone remembers in 2024 in Elmhurst for a long, long time. Loyola wins 3 straight. Mount Carmel wins 3 straight. East St. Louis has been there, 4 or 5 years. Nazareth wins 3 straight. See where I'm going with this? And Althoff could have been there last year, but Lena Winslow's been there several years in a row. And then you get the public and private debate. On top of the teams that are always there, now you have the public-private conversation that was super loud over the course of the weekend. And you know what? To be blunt, there's a lot of people making some really good points. The question is, how do you fix it? Have you thought about some of the things that you would consider, maybe not a plan, but just some of the elements you would consider, at least examining to fix this sort of thing so that we figure out a way to make our state championship games as competitive as possible?
Well, I mean, the one that a lot of people asked me that very same question this weekend. And I think the one thing that just kept coming back to me, and I think there was overwhelming evidence of this weekend, and it was a more extreme example of it, is I think the multiplier waiver really needs to be investigated, in terms of how it's applied and what's going on with it. Because what we're talking about in this situation is, it feels like we're in a cycle, an endless loop here, where we have teams that drop down, and then they go and they dominate for a few years, and then they go back up, and then they drop back down, and then they dominate again, and then they go back up. And it's just, it seems like this cycle is been repeated over and over again. The names might change, but the scenarios stay the same. So in my opinion, I think one of the biggest problems that we have right now is it's simply too easy to lose the waiver. I really believe that. And I think that's something that needs to be addressed moving forward, because you look at the first day of games, all 4 of your state champions were operating on multiplier waivers. 7 of the 8 champions that came through this year are going to be playing in a higher classification next year. So, I mean, it's like all of this in some ways is starting to work its way out. But as these teams go up, others are coming down. And some of them, to be honest with you, shouldn't be coming down. They just shouldn't. I think that's, I mean, some of them will take it upon themselves and say, no, we don't want to. And they'll play up and they'll do, in my opinion, what is the right thing to do. But, you know,
they have no incentive not to, though. You know,
some of them will not. And they will go down, and then this cycle will repeat itself. The names will change, but the circumstances will not. And until that gets fixed, I think all of these other issues are secondary in nature.
So you have the multiplier, the success factor. Are there any other elements you could add into it other than stretching them out? And that's the real question. If you can't find anything else, you know, Soucie, to me, the answer is a separate class, not a separate league. No Catholic school or private school wants to do their own tournament. No, they don't want to do that. But if you put a class where they're all together, you know, that might be different. And then the question, somebody asked me, well, what happens to a Decatur St. Teresa? You know, there are some problems with how you do this, because someone's going to get left behind. And you don't want that from a private school standpoint, because that's how schools close. That's the concern you have. You have jobs at stake, lives at stake. That's the thing. Is, you know, the unintended consequences down there. That's something that I think myself and others have to probably kind of keep in the forefront in some of this stuff. But I don't know if there's a good, perfect solution, particularly because of the geography of how the state lays out too. You know, that's the thing that you got to keep in mind too.
You know, you have people talking about, well, make 6 public and 2 private. You got a small private and a large private. Well, where's the break line? What do you do with schools like, I mean, Ottawa Marquette, like
right.
a 1A school that's had some success and won a few playoff games, but I mean, how is it fair to, like, if you split the privates in half and say, okay, big and small? Well, if you do that, they're right now, there are 49 of those schools. So what are you going to put 24 in a class and stack them by enrollment?
And everyone gets in?
You realize who is the 25th biggest public school? I mean, a private school? I haven't looked, but I guarantee it's a much bigger school than you think it is. So I mean, where's the line? How are you going to decide? Less than 500? Is that where you're going to break the line? Then you're going to have what? You're going to have a 12-team tournament and then a 28-team tournament. I mean, I just don't know how it works. Like I said, it's not. I don't think it's feasible.
And I bet, you know, the powers that be might ask you to figure out what would that look like, you know, if you had to put them in 2 in terms of just enrollment conversation. Yeah. I wonder where do the Boylan Titans land? And the problem with them is they have nowhere else to play. Rockford is it. That's the only private school out there. Right. Where are they going to go? I mean, you can't just punish people because of where they are too. That's the other thing.
Right.
So there's got to be some elements to this. And so I certainly understand it. I mean, look, we had Driscoll winning 3A like 7 years in a row, and everyone is complaining then. That was 25 years ago. The school closed. That's the only reason it stopped. That's the thing. So, you know, these factors change, and I think we all have to keep that in mind too. The other thing you have to consider, and I'm sure you have, but the rise in 8-man football is on the low end of the scale. So what happens? Do you have a 1A that is 8-man only when they get enough schools to do it? And then 2A through 6A being the public boundaried schools, and then see how messy this gets? You can't go bigger than 8 classes. You got 4 games in one day. We already saw you can't put any more because you're starting games at 9 o'clock on Saturday night. So just know that, you know, the thing that we have to remember, and I said this in the beginning of the podcast, if you have a proposal or if you have an idea, go to the IHSA website, go to your school's profile, look for the official representative, and email that person and let them know what you think. Don't complain. Come up with solutions. I'm a solution-oriented guy. Come up with solutions for it, because clearly we need to find one. And as you and I are talking, Soucie, I'm not sure you and I even have one, and we do this all the time.
And I'll add to that and say this. If you're curious about the data and want to know the information and all that other stuff, I'm going to quote Toy Story. You've got a friend in me. All right, check in. I'll happily give you any information I can to help you flesh out whatever information you're trying to figure out. Because if anybody spends a lot of time with this information, it's this guy over here. So, hey, if you got a theory, you want to run it by me, I'm more than willing to listen. I'll tell you that right now, because I want a solution to this too. And I want something that doesn't involve, not that I didn't appreciate the candor that everyone was providing to me this week.
Oh, I like it.
But I don't want to spend the next 5 to 10 years having this same conversation year after year after year. We may have to have them while we try to work this process out and make it better, but I don't want to have the same one over and over and over again for perpetual eternity. I'm not interested in that at all. So like I said,
keep in mind, go ahead.
If you want, if you're interested in making change and are like, hey, here's an idea, would this work? You know what? Let me know. Let's talk about it.
And I'll just say this too, that you have to get 600 schools probably on board with this. Like they're voting. This is like trying to talk to your local congressman and saying, hey, we should do this. And then they've got to go and convince all the schools to do it. These guys, these athletic directors, these principals, these superintendents, look, I'm in the business of education. They don't have time for this. They literally put a proposal out there, and the ones who do a lot, and Chauncey Carrick's a perfect example. He spends a lot of time putting proposals in districts, prep bowl stuff. He's been able to generate the conversation. But Chauncey doesn't have enough time to sit there and call every school to say, hey, what do you think of this and how are you going to vote? They don't have that time to do it. There are underperforming schools in the state. You know that, which means principals and superintendents don't really give a you-know-what about the football playoffs. They've got other things to deal with. So the point is that there has to be some sort of consensus built, and I'm not sure how you do it other than making sure that many of these official representatives that would have a vote would be fully informed by it. So this takes a while to fix. So if you're willing to commit to it, give yourself a chance to put some proposals together and find a way out of it. So that's the only way we're going to do it. Other than that, I love the kids' effort this weekend. The kids' efforts this weekend were great. I'm going to leave on this, Souce. I want you to tell me your player of the year and maybe your favorite player to cover and your favorite game you saw. Can you do all that? Let's start with player of the year.
You know what? I'm going to go right back to the 1A final this year. I think De'Aaron Hill was the most impressive player that I saw, both on video and delivering in that championship game. It was just really, really fun to watch him do that and in the way that he did it. And I can see all of the things that Oregon is excited about having to utilize with that young man. So that was definitely one of those things that I really enjoyed from state final weekend, was getting the chance to see him live. And that's the player that I think a few years from now, we will have fond memories of him as a former IHSA standout in the capacity of what maybe he'll be able to do at the next level.
You think your favorite player to cover this year? Well, I'll give you my player of the year. Well, one, I'm a homer, so Talon Taylor is my player of the year. That's easy. So I'm just going to get that out of the way. If it's not him, who is it? Okay, so for me, I thought Jack Elliott really came to play this year and is probably my player of the year if it's not Talon, because I just thought he was that good. And watching him, in the state championship game going, Vanderbilt got some here, and that's going to be really good. So, and hearing all the kudos that Jordan Lynch has bestowed upon him, that's not easy to do. For him to say just out loud, he's one of the best I've seen in 15 years. That guy was a Heisman finalist, and he's saying that about you as an 8th grader. That's not easy to kind of go through. So he would be my choice if it weren't Talon Taylor. Who's your favorite player to cover this year? How about that? Do you have a favorite player that you saw and watched all throughout the year?
I'm actually going to go to the defensive side of the ball for this one. A guy that always seemed like he was blowing up everything in his path Caden O'Rourke from Lincoln Way. That's a guy that I just really enjoyed playing, and just, you know, I saw his season stats at the end of the year and had his quarterback sacks down, and I honestly thought the number was a little bit low because I feel like I witnessed every one of them in person, because it felt like he was just a nightmare for opposing quarterbacks. He's a really, really fun player. I fully expect him to go make an impact at Northwestern.
My favorite player of the year is a tight one. I mean, I like Caden West from Central, the Rockets, because he's just a leader of men, and I watch him a lot. My favorite player to see this year, Batavia's Isaiah Brown.
It's a good one.
I really enjoyed, and that catch he made against Lincoln Way Central was outstanding. That's one of the best catches I've ever seen covering high school football, and I'm not kidding. When you go watch the tape of that, the BATV folks. The TV folks from Batavia were almost in shock that he made the catch, just because of how he had to twist back on a little out route, back shoulder rate. Couldn't get, and with a quarterback he's played with for 6 weeks at that point. So, and every time I watch him play, and he's grown, he's matured, he's quiet. I remember him as a loudmouth freshman, and now he's a nice young man who's just. He's going to go to work, and he's going to hit you and block you, and then he's going to help you up, and he's going to pat you on the butt and say, nice hit. And that's why he was just my favorite player to watch this year. Just watching these kids grow is always fun, but he was probably my favorite player this year.
Yeah, that's a good call.
What else we got here? What was the last one I had? I forgot. I already forgot. What were the three?
I think it was Game of the Year.
Game of the Year. That's right. Yes. Too many podcasts are rolling together here. Game of the Year for you.
I think I'm going to go back to the second week of the playoffs and go to the Batavia Lincoln Way West game. It was a fascinating game to watch, where I felt like Lincoln Way West had done pretty much everything that it wanted to do in the first half, and then the second half, it was almost like the universe reversed on its axis. I mean, it went the exact opposite way, and then all of a sudden Batavia was making every single play, and they pulled that win out of the fire. And you know, I felt terrible for the Lincoln Way West kids and their coaching staff just for having to stomach that loss. But it was also one of the most joyous victory celebrations that I think I can ever remember having, watching. I won't say I was a part of it, because I wasn't, but there was just so much glee on the players' faces. I mean, the head coach was practically crying after the game. He was so enthusiastic about what he had just witnessed, and it was just pure unadulterated joy. And it's just something that you don't really have the opportunity to witness very often in life, unfortunately. And it was really something to see. And I mean, flashing back to it a few weeks later, I saw Lincoln Way West Coast, Luke Lokank later on the sideline, and I'm like, you get over it yet? And he just looked at me and goes, nope. And I'm not sure when I'm going to. And I totally,
it takes months.
I can totally understand that. Yeah. And that's that was definitely one of those things where it was one of those games that you really genuinely, and people say this all the time, you really genuinely wish there was some way that both teams could have walked out of there with a victory, because it really kind of felt like both of them had done almost everything that they could do to try to get themselves there, but only one could walk away with it.
I will give you a couple of honorable mentions. Geneva beating Batavia, it wasn't a game. So I'm not going to really – I mean, I enjoyed it, but not many did. It wasn't really about the game on the field. And I absolutely loved Lake Forest doing their 99-yard drive in Libertyville at the same time that you're talking about the Batavia Lincoln Way West. That was happening simultaneously.
Yes, it was.
I watched that on NFHS and was like glued to it while I was doing soccer at the state finals too. My favorite game of the year was my Thursday night extravaganza in Palatine.
There you go.
In Palatine, it went back, forth, and I thought, this is fun. And I thought, Friend's going to win this game. They got a catch at the 1 yard line, and all they got to do is punch it in, and the fumble at the 1. And that was awesome. That atmosphere was tremendous. District 211, the Palatine and Frem students showed up and showed out big time on a Thursday ahead of the Jewish holiday. And if you get a chance to do the Thursday games as a casual fan, you've got to do it, because the atmosphere, they know they're the only ones playing around the state, and they act like it too. And it's a good time. So yep. I made the trip. That was the best trip I made all year. And so hats off to the folks from from Palatine, who got that big win over their crosstown rival. I thought we'd see both of them deeper in the postseason. It was not to be this year. Well, my friend, I enjoyed it this season. Let's do it again next year. How about that?
Sounds great to me. Looking forward to it.
Get on those schedules. I'll ask for a report in January, okay?
Sounds good.
This has been the Friday Night Drive podcast. He's Steve Soucie. I'm Matt Rodewald. Thank you for watching us all season long, and we look forward to an enjoyable off season, coaching changes, schedules, and multipliers, and everything nice. Enjoy the winter. We'll see you next fall.